So we're reviewing the precepts this month. And this week, as I said, we're reflecting on the second one, to restrain from taking what's not given, while also cultivating generosity. Each of the precepts, as we know, has an aspect of restraint, which is where we seem to mostly focus. But there's also this complementary aspect of cultivation. And today I want to explore how we can cultivate generosity. And in particular, how the natural world can model that generosity and teach and support us in our practice. For those of you that know me, I frequently look to nature as a guide because when I attune to the world around me, so many of the Buddhist teachings are apparent in a really visceral way. And at this time of year, I feel nature speaking to me so clearly about generosity. Right? I mean, for those of us who live in the northern hemisphere, we're entering the heights of summer, and it is the time of bounty in the world around us. The fields are awash in wildflowers. Trees are lush in their greenery. Birds are fledging. Young are being born to most of the wild creatures. The sun is warm and it lingers in the sky until later in the evening. There's so much being offered to us. So before I dive into the topic, I invite us to pause so we can each bring to mind a moment, maybe even something that you remember from the past few days when you relished the bounty of nature. And bring to mind all of it. The sights, the smells, the sounds, the felt scents. And for a moment, feel the experience, embody it. It's from this space that we can begin to understand the teachings. It's not in our minds, but it's in our bodies and it's in our hearts. There's a joke in Vermont, where I live, that in late July and August, you better lock your car doors when you go to town. And it's not because someone's apt to take something, but it's actually the opposite. It's so that someone will not deposit zucchini in your back seat. And usually it's those big overgrown zucchinis that almost look like baseball bats. Everyone's giving away zucchini because there are just so many of them. Shanti Deva, in the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, encourages us as we begin to practice generosity to give away such things as vegetables, like zucchinis. We start where it's relatively easy. And only later, he says, may we learn to give away our own flesh. I know that sounds pretty dramatic, but I interpret this as saying that as we deepen into the practice of generosity, we let go more and more of the sense of self and give from an open, unconstricted sense of being. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. The Zen tradition describes what are called the 4 gifts of generosity. And these offer, I think, a nice frame to understand the depth of this practice. First is the generosity of material things. Then generosity of protection. Third is the generosity of the Dharma. And finally, the generosity of non-fear. So as we practice over time, we're better able to offer these gifts to ourselves and each other. And each of these gifts of generosity are manifested in the natural world. And when we can recognize them happening all around us, I think in some way it's easier for us to embrace them in our own lives and in our own actions. It's kind of saying, yes, this is a natural way of being. So, first, there's the gift of giving material things. And this is probably the aspect of generosity that's most familiar to us. We give each other gifts often, whether it's something for our friend's home, or a piece of clothing or art, maybe a meal. And we notice in the giving that it feels good. And we can see this gift clearly in nature at this time of year, in our flower gardens and our vegetable gardens, in the warmth of the sun and the long daylight hours. And just like nature, we feel the bounty of our lives and we enjoy giving from that bounty. Second is the giving of protection, protecting that and those which are vulnerable. It's so obvious in nature that I think we often overlook it, how nature protects itself. The doe that cares for her fawn, the tall grasses that hide the young turkey chicks from foxes, the natural plant poisons that repel infesting bugs. All of nature exists in this web of intimate interconnection. And this makes it strong and less vulnerable and protected. And we're not left out of that web. Nature protects us too. If you've ever spent some quiet time with a tree, you know this. Especially on a hot day when the shade protects you from the hot sun. When you lean against the trunk and you can feel its steady support. And although I know it might sound a little woo-woo or kind of too 1960s, when you hug a tree and you can sense its care. And if you've never done that, I would highly suggest it. We all need to feel relatively safe and protected in order to thrive. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we can offer that to another, it is really an act of generosity. Maybe it's the offering of your time to help someone build a house, secure a job, care for their children. So many of our service agencies are focused on this level of generosity. And we can also offer friendship and connection, as simple as a phone call so someone knows they're not alone. That is a kind of protecting that we're offering. Third is the offering of the Dharma teachings. And that's the understanding of the truth of things, its impermanence, including mortality, unsatisfactoriness, and emptiness of a solid self. If we take it as a practice to attune to one of these truths on our daily walk, we'll see it everywhere speaking to us. It's in the changing of the seasons. And it's in the honest, though sometimes painful truth of survival of the fittest. And it's in the nursery logs in the forest that are created by dead trees which transform to support new life, new plants and insects. It's not always easy to accept, even in nature. But the more we turn toward these truths out there, the more easily we can begin to understand and accept them in ourselves and live our lives in line with them. And this is a gift, both to ourselves and to others. We see it in the lives of people we so admire, people like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. And there are so many others that are without big names, but who are living these truths, and they inspire us. Finally, there's the offering of what we call the gift of non-fear. We know the feeling of fear, of constriction and resistance, and it arises in consort with thoughts of self. So non-fear is a state of being open-hearted, unrestricted, which we can feel in moments when the self is just a little looser or slips away. I think it's this quality that so many of us feel in nature, but we're unable to name it. It's what poets often point to. The natural world, trees, plants, rocks, animals, insects, each part of the whole complex ecosystem is living without any self-consciousness or sense of self. Everything is just as it is, perfectly. And when we're in nature, we feel this. It's that feeling of being held and accepted for who we are without judgment that lets the constriction of all of our selfing thoughts fall away, so we're able to relax into our hearts just a little bit more. Nature lets us open and touch something deep inside that is who we are beyond our ideas of the self. Listen to this poem by Wendell Berry and see if you can hear how he touches on this in his poem. It's The Peace of Wild Things, which probably many of you are very familiar with. He says, "When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still waters, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free." This sense of non-fear is such a generous gift. It's the gift of full and complete presence that we can offer another. It's the offer to listen, to hold without judgment, to accept another. And we all know how that feels. This is the deepest sort of generosity. Generosity, it's a practice. It's a practice of letting go of wanting and clinging, letting go of our self-images and self-protection, and offering ourselves both to ourselves and to others. And then we notice how that feels. It's a practice of caring for others while also taking care of ourselves. And there will be times when we'll give too much, and we'll feel that. And there'll also be times when we hold on too tight, and we'll feel that. And what I think is the most reassuring part of all of this is that we will have innumerable opportunities to practice again. So, for any of you who are gardeners, you know that if you nip back the leggy branches of a plant and take off the flowering heads, that the plant will put out more shoots and that more blossoms will grow. And our generosity is just like that. It can also grow if we cultivate it. As we practice, generosity will blossom. And I think we'll notice that happiness will follow. So thank you all.